Whoa, kid, you look like you just saw a ghost. Eric blinked, forcing a smile at his coworker. Morning rush at Pump 1 was usually uneventful. Credit card swiped, receipt paper flapping in the breeze, the faint smell of gasoline and burnt coffee lingering in the air. But today an old black sedan rolled up, polished so it mirrored the cloudless sky. Behind the wheel sat an elegant silver-haired woman in a tailored navy coat, pearl studs at her ears, and a smile warm enough to melt asphalt. Eric, 26 years old and 3 years deep into a temporary job at the service station, jogged over and tipped his cap. "Good morning, ma'am. Fill up today?" "Yes, please, regular unleaded." $40. Her voice rang with a friendly lilt, the kind that made you stand a little taller. Eric punched the numbers into the pump keypad. Gasoline gurgled down the hose as he tried not to daydream. For an artist stuck slinging fuel to pay the rent, there was a certain poetry in all the anonymous stories that drifted through every day. Faces, accents, bumper sticker confessions. County lines dissolving the time it took to top off a tank. He'd once been painfully shy, but this job forced him to chat, to ask questions, to look people in the eye. Strangely, it had sanded his rough edges and buffed up his confidence far more than any self-help podcast ever could. The nozzle clicked off. Eric replaced it, wiped his hands on a rag, and returned to the driver's window with the card reader. "Cash or card, Ma?" The woman had already reached out to hand him a crisp 50, and that's when he saw it. A small tattoo just below her right wrist, a half-heart entwined with a tiny crucifix. Simple black ink, slightly faded, but instantly recognizable. Eric's throat constricted. That doodle had lived his memory since childhood summers. Sneaking cookies past bedtime, impromptu backyard puppet shows, a lullaby humming through thin walls. "Young man, are you all right?" The woman's brow furrowed. Yeah, sorry, just..." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between her face and that sliver of ink. She angled her wrist, following his gaze. "This little thing? Got ages ago. Braver than smart, I suppose. It reminds me of someone he managed, someone named Claudia." Her eyes widened, then softened. "Well, isn't that something? I'm Claudia Smith." Heartbeat drumming in his ears, Eric blurted. "Claudia Smith, who used to babysit Eric and Maggie Kent?" Silence stretched a single heartbeat before her face lit up like dawn. "Eric Kent? My goodness, look at you." The card reader nearly slipped from his grip. Seconds later, he was enveloped in her arms, the smell of lavender soap flooding his senses and yanking him straight back to age 8. "Look how tall you are. Your dad used to joke you'd be dunking basketballs by 12. He laughed, voice thick. "Mom's still waiting on that dunk." "And sweet Maggie, how's your sister?" The smile faltered. She passed away. Car accident years ago." "Oh, darling." Claudia's hand fluttered to her heart. "I'm so sorry." "I miss her," he admitted, "but I'm okay." 2 cars idled impatiently behind the sedan, horns chirping. Life was impatient even during reunions. Claudia rolled her eyes at the honks. "Tell you what, come by the house tonight when you get off. We've got years to cover." She scribbled an address and phone number on an old grocery receipt, pressed it into his palm, then eased the sedan forward, waving through the window as she disappeared into traffic. For the next 8 hours, Eric's body stayed at the station, but his mind drove circles around memory lane. The summer afternoons Claudia spent turning cardboard boxes into castles. The way she'd sneak him chocolate, even when Mom declared a strict no-sweets rule. Her silly made-up song for tying shoelaces. She'd felt like a second mother, until Dad's promotion uprooted the family to another town. 10-year-old Eric had cried himself to sleep the night they left, vowing he'd write letters every week. But life, new school, new chores, teenage angst had quietly swept that vow away. Now, somehow, the universe had steered her Buick to Pump 1 at precisely 9:17 a.m. on a random Tuesday. Coincidence? Fate? Eric couldn't decide, but the hum beneath his ribs insisted tonight mattered. At 5:05 p.m. he clocked out, bolted home to his cramped studio apartment, and peeled off the gasoline-scented uniform. Quick shower, microwave burrito, a final glance in the bathroom mirror, tousled brown hair, paint-spattered jeans, sketchpad tucked under one arm. He dialed Claudia's number. "Claudia, it's Eric. I'm headed over if now's still good." "Can't wait, dear. Drive safe." Sunset spilled orange across the windshield as he followed GPS to a quiet cul-de-sac line with neat hedges and porch swings. Claudia's house was modest but cheery. Flower baskets, a sky-blue front door. Welcome mat that read, "Come as you are." He exhaled, stepped out, and rang the bell. The door swung open instantly. "There you are," she beamed, ushering him inside a living room painted warm butter yellow. A knitted throw draped over a wingback chair. Framed photos of distant beaches and laughing children lined the mantel. "Water? Coffee? I still have your favorite, milk chocolate bars." "Water's great. And yeah, I can't say no to chocolate," he admitted, laughing as she disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later she returned with glass and a plate piled with miniature chocolate squares. Eric popped one into his mouth, savoring the familiar sweetness. Time folded in on itself. The same flavor he'd snacked on during backyard camping adventures, while Claudia shone a flashlight under her chin and told spooky stories. "Now," she said, settling onto the sofa, "catch me up, Mr. Kent. Did you ever chase that art degree you ramble about every afternoon?" Eric's smile dimmed. "Not exactly. Folks didn't think painting paid the bills. I'm saving for night classes, maybe graphic design or something more practical." Claudia clicked her tongue, eyes twinkling. "Practical is overrated, love. The world needs dreamers." He shrugged. "Dreams cost tuition." She leaned back, studying him with that gentle, all-seeing gaze he remembered from childhood. "You know, I always pictured you in a sunlit studio, paint under your nails, canvases stacked to the ceiling." Eric flushed. "I still paint, mostly after shifts, sometimes between gigs. But rent doesn't pay itself." She folded her hands, thinking. "When I was your age, I wanted to travel. Paris, Nairobi, Patagonia. My parents insisted I stay, get a steady job, save every penny. I listened. Now I've got a passport with one lonely stamp." She chuckled, but sadness flickered behind the smile. "It's not too late," he offered. "Oh, honey, these knees aren't built for Machu Picchu anymore. But you've got decades of mountains ahead. Promise me you won't park your dreams on the shoulder because someone else can't see the road." The conviction in her voice nudged something inside him, a rusty gear trying to turn. He nodded, unsure what to say. Claudia reached for a wicker box on the coffee table, lifted the lid, and drew out a small stack of envelopes bound with twine. "Life's funny," she said softly. "Sometimes it circles back to hand us a second chance." She placed a bundle in his lap. Eric frowned, untying the twine. Inside were cashier's checks, 10 of them, each for $5,000. His breath caught. "Claudia, I can't." "You can and you will," she interrupted, voice firm but kind. "That's college tuition, studio rent, paint, ramen noodles, whatever fuels your niche." "But why me?" "Because once upon a time you painted me a picture of a tiger with crayons and said, 'Don't be scared, Miss Claudia, he'll protect you.' I kept that drawing all these years. It reminded me courage comes in bright colors." She squeezed his hand. "Let me return the favor." Eric's eyes stung. Words tangled on his tongue. So he simply nodded, clutching the bundle like a life raft. The grandfather clock chimed 7. Twilight outside painted lavender streaks across the curtains, and somewhere deep in his chest, an old dormant spark flared back to life. That night, Eric sat in his tiny apartment with a stack of Claudia's checks laid neatly on the kitchen table. He didn't touch them, didn't even think of cashing one yet. He just stared at them, as if looking long enough would make the weight of it all settle properly. His fingers ran over the edge of the paper, each slip a quiet thunderclap, reminding him of what was possible now. He grabbed his sketch pad and a pencil and began to draw. Not for a client, not for a resume, just for himself. The lines flowed easily for the first time in years. His hands remembered. His soul remembered. The next morning, Eric walked into the community college he'd only driven past until then. He stood in the admissions office, looking like he didn't belong, until a young woman behind the counter asked, "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "I want to enroll in the art program." It was as simple as that. Over the next few months, Claudia became a constant presence in Eric's life again. Not just a benefactor, but a guide, a friend, a mentor. She'd call him after classes, ask him to bring over his latest sketches, and sit cross-legged on the living room floor like she was 20 years younger, flipping through his portfolio. "I still say you were born to paint," she'd declare. "I'm starting to believe you," Eric would reply. She'd show up unannounced sometimes, dropping off art supplies with handwritten notes like, "Every great artist needs a right brush," or "The Louvre won't hang itself." Eric started documenting his progress online, posting speed painting videos, time-lapse canvas builds, and voiceover breakdowns of each piece. At first, it was just a few curious viewers. But over time, something clicked. Comments started rolling in. His subscriber count grew. His audience found him. People who connected with his raw, honest storytelling and authentic art. One video in particular, called "The Tattoo That Brought Her Back," went viral. In it, he shared the story of seeing Claudia at the gas station, the tattoo that started it all, and how that one encounter reawakened his dream. Viewers flooded the comments. "This gave me chills. I'm crying at work. Thank you for this. She's an angel on earth." Or was. Because shortly after Eric turned 28, Claudia passed away. It happened quietly. A stroke. Peaceful, they said. She'd just made herself tea. Had a new mystery novel on the arm of her chair. Eric was devastated. He stood at her funeral in a charcoal suit, holding a small canvas in his hands. It was the last piece he painted for her, one she never got to see. A woman in the front row reached for her tissue. Another, probably her 70s, nodded silently as Eric stepped to the podium. "She found me when I didn't even know I was lost," Eric said, voice steady but hollow. "And she gave me the courage to be myself again." He looked down at the painting, a portrait of Claudia as she'd been that day at the pump. Radiant, smiling, eyes full of knowing, the tattoo visible, hand outstretched. "She believed in me," he continued, "when my own parents couldn't. She didn't just give me money, she gave me back my identity." Eric took a deep breath. "And if I ever make it, I mean, really make it, every gallery that hangs my work will hang hers too, because none of it would exist without Claudia Smith." When he stepped down, a quiet applause rippled through the room. It was soft, respectful, but it carried weight. After the service, Eric walked through Claudia's house one last time. Everything was as she left it. The teacup still on the table. A half-read book with a pressed violet between its pages. The notes she used to write him were tucked in a drawer, alongside his childhood tiger crayon drawing, still preserved in a cheap plastic frame. He took that drawing home, hung it on the wall of his studio, and then he painted, every night, sometimes until dawn. Claudia's voice echoed in his mind like a gentle chorus. "Don't let your dream die on you just because someone else doesn't see what you see." 2 years passed. Eric's art was now hanging in small galleries from Portland to Santa Fe. His YouTube channel crossed 100,000 subscribers. And one fall morning, as golden leaves littered the sidewalk outside his apartment, his wife went into labor. They'd talked about the name for months. Eric knew exactly what he wanted the moment he saw her tiny face for the first time. "Claudia Margaret Kent," he whispered, cradling her. His wife smiled through tears. "It's perfect." Later that week, Eric sat rocking his newborn daughter in the nursery. He whispered stories to her about gas stations and tattoos, and a woman who never stopped believing in a boy with a sketch pad. He promised to teach her to dream, to create, to risk. And when she was old enough, he'd show her the tiger drawing and tell her, "This is where our family story really began." The days that followed Claudia Margaret Kent's birth were some of the most meaningful of Eric's life. He'd always imagined fatherhood would feel overwhelming, and in some ways it was, but there was a peace that settled over him too. Like all the wild, chaotic pieces of his past had finally found a place. He still worked long hours in the studio, now tucked into the back of their small 2-bedroom home, and spent his evenings rocking Claudia to sleep while sketching quietly by lamplight. Sometimes, as he watched her little chest rise and fall in rhythm, He'd remember how Claudia Smith used to sing lullabies that didn't rhyme, that didn't follow any real tune, but always made him feel safe. So he started writing his own for his daughter. One night, after feeding the baby and kissing his wife goodnight, Eric sat in front of his camera to film a new YouTube video. This time, not a speed painting or tutorial, just him in his studio, talking to the lens. "I want to tell you a story," he began. "The story of Claudia, of course, but this time with an ending that had been years in the making. When she died, I didn't just lose a friend. I lost the first person who ever saw my dream and treated it like it was real. Before the degrees, before the galleries, before any of this, she believed. And that belief saved me." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I used to think I had to earn my place in this world by playing it safe. But Claudia taught me that playing it safe can sometimes cost you the very life you're trying to protect." His voice caught for a moment. Then he smiled. "So now I paint. I teach. I tell stories. I raise a daughter who already has more light in her eyes than I ever did at her age. And every time I create something new, I think of the woman who walked into my gas station like an angel in disguise with a wrist tattoo that brought it all flooding back." He reached behind him and held up the framed crayon drawing of the tiger. "She kept this for decades because she said it gave her courage." He set the picture down and looked back at the camera. "And I hope this story gives you courage too. To go after what sets your heart on fire. To believe in second chances. And to never, ever underestimate the impact you can have on someone's life just by showing up with kindness." When the video went live, it became one of his most viewed pieces. People around the world left comments that felt like open letters to their own long-lost mentors, their own Claudias. Some shared stories of teachers who changed their paths. Others spoke of grandparents, neighbors, or friends who helped them believe when they'd stopped believing in themselves. One comment stood out to Eric. "This made me call my old high school art teacher tonight. I haven't talked to him in years, but I just told him thank you." And he cried. Eric responded to that comment directly. "I think Claudia would have liked hearing that. Keep the ripple going." He started calling it that. The ripple. It became more than just a nickname for the story. It became a movement. A few months later, Eric launched a small nonprofit in Claudia Smith's honor, the Ripple Project. Its mission was simple: fund the dreams of undersupported young artists and creatives, the ones who had talent, but no backing, vision, but no voice. He offered grants, workshops, mentorships, and even hosted pop-up art showcases in cities across the country. And at every event, there was always a corner reserved for a display with one central piece, the tiger drawing. Right underneath it, a small plaque read, "To Claudia, who saw the masterpiece in a child's crayon sketch and taught him to never color inside someone else's lines." The project gained traction quickly. News outlets picked it up. Eric was invited to podcasts, panel discussions, and even a TEDx talk titled "The Woman at Pump One: How One Conversation Changed My Life." He always kept the storytelling real, never polished it for effect, never tried to make it more dramatic than it was, because it didn't need drama. The truth of it was powerful enough. As time passed, Eric's daughter started drawing too. At first it was scribbles, but then he noticed the colors, the way she chose them. Bold, unexpected, emotional. One afternoon, she handed him a picture. It was a woman in a car, smiling, with a tiny tattoo drawn on her wrist. "Who's this?" he asked gently, though he already knew. She grinned. "That's Miss Claudia. From your stories. I think she's watching me too." Eric's heart swelled. "You think so?" "Uh-huh. She's probably painting with the clouds." He laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Yeah, I think she is." Years passed, but the legacy of Claudia Smith only grew stronger. Eric often marveled at how one small act of kindness, a tattooed wrist, a tank of gas, and a smile, had rippled through time, affecting not just his life but the lives of countless others. By the time his daughter Claudia turned 6, the Ripple Project had expanded into more than he ever imagined. What started as scholarship for artists had evolved into a nationwide mentorship network, pairing aspiring creatives with mentors in everything from painting to filmmaking music to fashion design. He wasn't trying to build an empire, just a space where dreams were spoken out loud, believed in, and nurtured. One spring afternoon, Eric sat in the back row of a high school auditorium in a small town in Minnesota. The stage was filled with student artwork, some taped to folding boards, others displayed on easels. A senior named Jonah was about to speak. His mentor had sent Eric a copy of his final portfolio, and emotion in the boy's work had moved him deeply. Jonah cleared his throat nervously and began, "I used to think art was just something I liked, something I did when nobody was watching. I never told anyone how much I wanted to pursue it. Until one day, a grant arrived from someone I'd never met. His name was Eric Kent, and he believed in me before I believed in myself." Eric felt his throat tighten. Jonah continued, "That gift didn't just pay for art camp. It gave me permission to be me. So this last painting, this one, The Tiger in the Storm, it's for him and for the woman from his story. I hope she knows her ripple made it all the way here." The auditorium applauded. Eric wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and smiled. The tiger again. Somehow, it always came back to that. He waited until after the event, approached Jonah quietly, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said. "Keep painting the storm." Jonah's eyes widened. Are you Eric Kent?" Eric nodded. "I am. But today, this is your moment." On the flight back home, Eric thought a lot about the path his life had taken. There were no shortcuts, no lucky breaks that just fell into his lap. Everything came down to that one moment. Claudia recognizing him, taking a chance on him, choosing to believe in something she hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. And in every project, every painting, every talk he gave, he tried to honor that choice. At home, his daughter had left a note on his desk in crayon. "I missed you. I drew you flying on a paintbrush. Love, Claudia." It made him laugh, out loud, alone in his office. He taped it next to the original tiger drawing. That summer, something unexpected happened. A publishing house reached out with an offer. They wanted to compile his life story into a book, not just a viral video or the nonprofit journey, but the full arc from childhood to the gas station to Claudia to everything that followed. At first, he hesitated. The story was so personal, so raw. But then he remembered what Claudia had always told him. Your story isn't just yours if it helps someone else find their way. So he agreed. The book was titled Pump One, a story of art, loss, and the woman who believed. It was part memoir, part reflection, part creative encouragement, and it reached people in ways Eric never expected. Emails poured in, letters, even. People shared their own Claudias. A teacher who stayed late after school, a neighbor who gifted them their first guitar, a grandmother who whispered dreams into their ear when everyone else laughed. Eric read every single one. One letter stood out from a woman in Arizona. "I'm a nurse now, but I used to sketch in the corners of my notebooks as a kid. No one took it seriously. Then one day my high school janitor, of all people, found one of my drawings in the trash and told me I was talented. I laughed it off then. But reading your story reminded me of that moment. I picked up a sketchbook again yesterday for the first time in 20 years. Eric framed that letter, too. As his own daughter grew older, Eric started involving her in the Ripple Project, not in a passing the torch kind of way, but more like letting her see what kindness could do when it was paired with courage and purpose. She helped pack care kits for scholarship winners, joined him on Zoom calls with young mints, and even handed out mini chocolate bars with sticky notes attached. "You matter," from Claudia Jr. It made people smile. One day, while walking to their local art museum, Eric and his daughter passed a young woman sketching quietly in the corner. Her strokes were soft but purposeful. Claudia stopped and watched for a moment, then leaned toward her dad. "She looks like she's drawing something important." Eric nodded. "She probably is." Without prompting, Claudia pulled out a crumpled sticky note and a mini chocolate bar from her tiny purse and placed it beside the artist. The woman looked up, surprised. Claudia simply grinned and said, "I think you're really good." They walked away before the woman could respond. But Eric looked back and saw her holding the note, pressing it to her chest. The ripple continued. Eric knew then that Claudia Smith's story would never really end. Not with her passing. Not with his book. Not even with the nonprofit. Because kindness, when it's real, doesn't need a big platform or a spotlight. It just needs one person. One moment. One choice to say, I believe in you. That's what she did for him. And that's what he now tried to do for the world. One drawing. One student. One tiger at a time. It was a crisp autumn morning when Eric received an email that made him sit still for several minutes, blinking at the screen. The subject line simply read, Smith Elementary School request. He opened it. A teacher named Mrs. Rawlings had written to say her third-grade students had watched one of his interviews online, the one where he spoke about the tiger drawing, and had been inspired to create their own courage animals. She asked if Eric would consider visiting the school to talk about art, storytelling, and how even small moments can become something life-changing. Eric replied with a quick and heartfelt yes. 2 weeks later, he walked into Smith Elementary carrying a small canvas under his arm and a stack of blank sketchbooks under the other. The hallway walls were covered in crayon-colored animals. Lions with glasses, rainbow elephants, birds flying through fire. Each drawing was captioned with a quote, My animal helps me speak in front of class. Mine protects me when Mom and Dad fight. This one makes me brave when I'm scared to be myself. Eric's heart swelled. In the classroom, the students buzzed with excitement. He told them the story, the real story, about the gas station, the tattoo, the woman with the silver hair and a smile like sunshine. He didn't make it dramatic. He didn't try to be a hero. He just told the truth. I wasn't anyone special, he said, kneeling beside one of the kids. I just had someone who saw something in me, and that made all the difference. Then he held up the small canvas he'd brought. It was a new version of the tiger, bigger now, painted in bold brushstrokes, with streaks of color bursting from behind like an aura. But in this version, the tiger was surrounded by smaller animals, each one different, each one unique. This is what I see when I look at all of you, he said. A world full of young artists, each with something powerful inside them. Don't wait for permission. You already have it. He handed out the sketchbooks one by one, writing a note on the first page of each. In Claudia Margaret's, he wrote, To the bravest person I know, never stop coloring outside the lines. On the flight home, Eric thought about how far he'd come, not in terms of awards or social media followers or gallery exhibitions. Those were just ornaments. What really mattered was that his life had become what he always hoped his art would be, honest, vivid, and full of purpose. At home, his wife met him at the door, holding a mug of tea and smiling. How was it? Beautiful, Eric replied. They're going to change the world, those kids. Later that night, after their daughter had fallen asleep, Eric stood in his studio staring at the wall. On it hung a gallery of his most meaningful pieces, not the ones that sold for most, but the ones that carried memories. At the center of it all was the tiger. But now, just below it, was a new frame, a photo of Claudia Margaret holding her own tiger drawing. She had drawn it that morning before school, carefully signing it in block letters. To Miss Claudia, from the little one you never met. Eric sat down and cried, not out of sadness, but out of something deeper. Gratitude, fulfillment, a kind of joy that didn't need explanation. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and hit record. Hey, everyone, he said, voice low. It's Eric. I wasn't planning to post tonight, but I just want to say something real quick. He turned the phone to show the tiger drawings, both old and new. This is what legacy looks like. Not buildings, not plaques, just love passed on through action, through belief, through a hand on your shoulder that says, keep going, you've got this. He looked back at the camera. If you're watching this and you've ever doubted your path, don't. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take the next step. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one who keeps someone else's spark alive. He ended the video with his usual sign-off, but this time he whispered it like a prayer. Be someone's ripple. When the Ripple Project hit its 10-year anniversary, a national art conference honored Claudia Smith posthumously with a Legacy of Kindness award. Eric accepted it on her behalf. His daughter, now a teenager, introduce him on stage. She used to sing lullabies without words, Eric told the audience, smiling through misty eyes. And somehow, even without lyrics, they said everything I needed to hear. That's what kindness is. It doesn't need fanfare. It just needs to show up. He paused, looking around the auditorium, and she showed up for me, for every artist who came after, and for every story that still needs to be told. The crowd rose to its feet, and in that moment, Eric Kent understood something he had always felt but never fully said, that even in the quietest places, at a lonely gas pump, on an ordinary Tuesday, God or the universe or fate sometimes places a miracle, a woman with a tattoo and a smile, and the courage to believe in someone just because they could. Thank you for reading this story. If it moved you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, every ripple begins with a single drop. Maybe today that drop is you.